No one sails from the Strait of Hormuz to anywhere in the world without the permission of the United States Navy.
Oh, really?
Wanted to seize it, but because of these. What is the reality of the blockade, Iranian blockade?
What year is this? 2026, yep. 2032?
6 years to rebuild what we spent in 7 weeks.
Iran is fighting as a proxy for China. And Iran is depleting the inventory, the weapons inventory of the United States. So that right now the United States is in no shape whatsoever that it could attack, try to challenge China. What the whole economic impact, let's say the first, since February 28th up until April 10th. Let's see, we're at 24 now, so it's 17. Say at April 17th. That was the period in which the water was flowing out. Now it's starting to come in. And as it comes in, it's going to accelerate.
A former CIA officer sitting on camera telling you the blockade is theater. Our missiles are gone and China is the winner. Let's look at the receipts. Welcome back to ARM Geopolitics. I'm Aaron, and on this channel, we don't just cover the news. We cut through the noise, dominate the narrative, and give you the analysis mainstream media is too scared to run. Vigilance is our shield, truth is our weapon. Let's get into it. But before we dig in, I'm going to tell you all exactly who Larry Johnson is and why you should care about what he has to say. This man once sat in front of Congress and told them there were no WMDs in Iraq. Nobody listened. Then we invaded. Then we found nothing. That's the guy we're watching today. Larry Johnson is a former CIA intelligence officer and counterterrorism analyst at the U.S. Department of State. He was inside the machine. He left. And ever since, he's been one of the most consistent critics of the gap between what Washington says and what's actually happening on the ground. His track record matters. In 2003, he was one of the very few voices alongside Scott Ritter who pushed back hard on the WMD narrative used to justify the Iraq war. He was right. The weapons weren't there. Now, full transparency, because that's what we do here. This interview was filmed on a channel with clear sympathies towards the Iranian side of this conflict. Now, I'm not endorsing the platform. I'm verifying every claim against independent sources. That's the job. 3 things I believe every American needs to understand right now. 1. The blockade math. The gap between what officials are saying and what independent maritime data actually shows. 2. The missile stockpile numbers. CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, just published a report this week. These numbers are not classified. They're publicly available. And they should lead the story on every network in America. They're not. And number 3, the China angle. How Beijing, without firing a single missile, may be walking away from this war as the biggest strategic winner. And what that means for Taiwan and for you. Let's start with the blockade. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, stood at the Pentagon podium and told American people that nothing moves in or out of the Persian Gulf without the U.S. Navy's permission. That is a specific, verifiable public claim. So let's verify it. Larry Johnson's response was colorful. I'll keep it PG. He called Hegseth, quote, completely full of it. But I don't need the insult. I have the data.
It looks like the United States is intercepting about 10% of the ships that come out. Because they don't have enough ships. You don't. They're not within 100 miles of the Iranian coast. If they were, they'd be getting shot. There's an independent company that follows maritime traffic, and they reported there 34 ships had already come out from Iran and sailed away and were not stopped. So this is Pete Hegseth trying to say, oh, that's not true. I'm going to show you we're tough. We're everywhere. We're big. We're bad.
Verified independently, that independent company is Vortexa, a commercial maritime analytics firm that shipping companies pay real money for accurate data. Not exactly a pro-Iran propaganda outlet. And Lloyd's List, established in 1734, one of the oldest maritime intelligence services on Earth, separately confirmed that by April 20th, at least 26 Iranian ships had successfully bypassed the US blockade line in both directions. Now, to be fair, there is a counter argument. The United Now, to be fair, there is a counter argument. The United Against Nuclear Iran argues that effectiveness shouldn't be measured by raw numbers, but by whether large-scale illicit shipments are being deterred. That's a legitimate point, and I'll give them credit for it. But here's my problem. When your Secretary of Defense says, nothing moves without our permission, that's not the language of targeted enforcement. That is an absolute claim. And absolute claims need absolute evidence. The evidence isn't there. And the gap between claim and reality matters, because if we're not straight about something this trackable, what else aren't we being straight about? Now, here's where the geography gets uncomfortable, because if you understand why the Cuban Missile Crisis blockade worked, you immediately understand why this one can't work the same way.
Iran has this thing to the north of it called the Caspian Sea. So it has maritime access direct to Russia. It can ship through Russia. Armenia, I don't include Armenia. Armenia, it has connection with Armenia as well. But the problem with Armenia is they reportedly have agreed to allow their airfields to be used by the United States if hostilities break out again with Iran.
Yeah, this is the tweet that Donald Trump put out, and then he removed that. He said that Armenia, they know, they understand the situation in the Middle East. They're trying to help us, and they're gonna help us big time. Here he said, Armenia will help big time if we attack Iran.
And Armenia will get its ass kicked for doing if it does that, because Iran, and actually probably Russia too, will take steps against Armenia. So, but the point is, Iran is not trapped on the north and to the west. You got Turkmenistan and Pakistan. You know, Pakistan, they go through, and I guess the port of Karachi is right there on the. So Iran's not blocked in. It's not like the blockade that was erected against Cuba during the Cuban Missile War. I seem to the number I heard on that was it was like 77 ships, maybe 115 that the United States surrounded there. The United States right now has maybe 15 to 20 ships, which that sounds like a lot. Well, just go out in the ocean and look as far as you can see either way, 5 miles. And, we're talking hundreds of miles.
Let me give you the comparison. Cuba, 1962, an island, 42,000 square miles, one direction to blockade. The United States deployed 77 to 115 ships. Iran 2026, 637,000 square miles, borders 7 countries, direct Caspian Sea access to Russia, land routes through Pakistan, Port of Karachi nearby. We have 15 to 20 ships. And here is the detail. US naval assets are not stationed inside the Strait of Hormuz itself because of Iranian mines and the very real risk of getting shot at. The Navy operates in the Gulf of Oman, outside of the strait. Ships leaving Iran have to pass through the strait first, through waters we cannot safely enter, before they can be potentially intercepted. They haven't thought this through. That line, I keep coming back to it, because if it's accurate, and the geography suggests it is, this is a strategic planning failure, not a military failure. The sailors and the officers are executing exactly what their capabilities allow. The failure belongs to whoever designed the plan.
Their heroin or their cocaine up to the United States, 10% of it gets intercepted. All right, cost of doing business. 90% though goes through, and they make the money off that 90%. It's just a matter of bulk. You send 30 ships out. The United States does not have 30 ships to attach to each one to try to board. They simply don't. And then once they board them, then what? Then you have to assign resources to control the ship and the crew. So they haven't thought this thing through.
Now, here's why the cartel model works for Iran. They've been under sanctions for 46 years. 46 years. And they have had nearly half a century to build shadow fleets, alternative routes, and work around infrastructure. We've had 9 days to try to stop it with 15 ships. And look, I'm someone who talks about securing our own border constantly. We've been running the same interception playbook against Mexican cartels for 4 decades. That hasn't worked either. So there's some uncomfortable consistency there. Now, hold on to this cartel logic because it connects directly to what's happening with our missile stockpile. The blockade being 10% effective isn't just an embarrassment. It means we're spending real resources, ships, fuel, personnel, for minimal strategic impact. And those resources are coming from somewhere. 46 years of sanctions. And Iran's shadow fleet is better than our enforcement fleet. Let that sink in for a second. All right, let me show you where the money went.
And the sources that we spoke to, the U.S. military has expended at least 45% of its stockpile of precision strike missiles, at least half of its inventory of THAAD missiles, which are designed to intercept ballistic missiles, and nearly 50% of its stockpile of Patriot air defense interceptor missiles, which are, of course, very key air defense munitions. Now, the U.S. military has also expended approximately 30% of its Tomahawk missiles stockpile, which are those long-range munitions that are really key to attacking targets further away. More than 20% of its stockpile of long-range joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, and approximately 20% of its SM-3 and SM-6 missiles. Now, this is important because these munitions take a while to be replaced.
Now, here's where Johnson gets into the specific math, and I want to verify each number for you in real time.
Every time a missile is fired at a point that's being defended by a Patriot battery, that Patriot battery is going to fire 2 of those PAC-3s. So, I mean, let's do the math. We gave at least 1,000 of those PAC-3s to Ukraine. Ukraine's used up all that it has. It doesn't have any more. Then we had PAC-3s distributed. They were in Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates. They all had some, and total number of missiles that Israel fired, and we're talking ballistic missiles that are the kinds of things that these are supposed to intercept, that fired since February 28th, is like 4,000. Okay, if they've launched 4,000, do the math. That means you'd have to have 8,000 PAC-3 missiles. We don't have 8,000. It's virtually drained, and the production problem is the THAADs are being produced at a rate of 9 per month, maybe 10, and the PAC-3s they produce at about a rate of 50 per month, maybe up to 60, and one of the big issues is much of the critical supplies, materials that are used to construct those missiles comes from China. And China has now slowed up and stopped delivering some of the rare earth minerals and other things. So the United States doesn't have, it's not like a factory that's running at only 20%. And all you got to do is sort of turn up the power, and then it goes up to 100%. No, they don't have that ability. So it's going to be years before they replenish those stockpiles, if at all. Now,
let me verify and update Johnson's numbers with what's public. Lockheed Martin confirmed in January 2026 they delivered 620 PAC-3 MSEs in 2025, their best year ever, a 60% increase over 2 years. A new framework agreement targets tripling production to 2,000 per year, but that target is still years away, requires congressional funding, and has no delivery specified for 2026. And there's this kicker from the CSIS analysis. Saudi Arabia's January 2026 foreign military sales request alone asks for 730 PAC-3 rounds. That's more than 14 months of the entire global production from the only PAC-3 assembly line on Earth, Camden, Arkansas. before we count what we're using. I want to be honest. Johnson's figures are directionally accurate, but the exact ballistic missile count of 4,000 is harder to verify to the specific number. CSIS works with DoD budget documents and historical employment patterns. The conclusion holds regardless. The gap between what we have expended and what we can produce near term is very real. And it's documented by CSIS, not by Larry Johnson. Before we get to China, and China is the piece of that ties this whole thing together, Johnson gives us the single best description of what's happening to the global economy right now.
It doesn't have an immediate impact. It's like I've been using the analogy of the start of a tsunami. When the tsunami first hits, it's not a wall of water rushing over you. It is you're sitting there at the beach and you watch the water go away. Oh, God, this is great. Look at all the beach. Look at all the fish flopping around. You can run out, But then when the water starts coming at you, it comes fast. And unless you'd already sought high ground, you're likely going to lose your life. So it is that's what the whole economic impact. Let's say since February 28th up until April 10th. Let's see, we're at 24 now, so to 17. Say to April 17th. That was the period in which the water was flowing out. Now it's starting to come in. And as it comes in, it's going to accelerate, and the economic consequences are going to become worse with each passing day.
Let me translate the tsunami into your kitchen table. Before this war, 25% of global seaborne oil and 20% of global LNG went through the Strait of Hormuz. 1/3 of global fertilizer supply, same strait. We're in spring planting season right now. 20,000 Lufthansa flights affected by jet fuel cost spikes. Kazakhstan cutting oil exports to Europe starting May 1st. This isn't geopolitics. This is your grocery bill in September, your airline ticket in December, your heating bill next winter. The water is starting to come in. And here's the connecting thought going through our next section. China? China already sought high ground. While we're burning missiles, China was building its strategic petroleum reserves on discounted Iranian and Russian crude and tightening its grip on the one supply chain we cannot fight a modern war without. Let me show you exactly what that means. Okay, this is the piece of the puzzle that almost nobody's connecting publicly. And I want to be precise because precision matters here.
And one of the big issues is much of the critical supplies, materials that are used to construct those missiles comes from China. And China has now slowed up and stopped delivering some of the rare earth minerals and other things. So the United States doesn't have, it's not like a factory that's running at only 20%. And all you got to do is sort of turn up the power, and then it goes up to 100%. No, they don't have that ability. So it's going to be years before they replenish those stockpiles, if at all. And that's why I maintain China is really sort of enjoying this, because Iran is fighting as a proxy for China, and Iran is depleting the weapons inventory of the United States, so that right now the United States is in no shape whatsoever that it could try to challenge China. There are scenarios that China is going to invade Taiwan and take it over. No, China's going to, keep taking the Chinese leaders out to dinner, and wooing them, and romancing them, so to speak. That I think you're going to find maybe within the next year or two that Taiwan on its own is just going to say, this relationship with the United States is crazy.
Let me separate what's documented fact from what's Johnson's analytical conclusion, because they're both worth taking seriously, just in different ways. Documented fact: China controls approximately 85% of global rare earth mineral production and 98% of rare earth processing and refining capacity. These minerals are inside our Tomahawk guidance systems, our PAC-3 Seekers, our AMRAAM missiles, our F-35 avionics. You cannot make these weapons without these materials. Documented fact, in October 2025, China issued Ministry of Commerce Announcement number 61, extending export controls to 12 of 17 rare earth elements, with licensing requirements of any magnet containing even trace amounts of Chinese origin material. CSIS's Critical Mineral Security Program Director, Gracelyn Baskron, told Foreign Policy Directly, "There's a lot of pressure on these materials, and China has cut us off of that access." The South China Morning Post, and I flag this as a Chinese-owned media, so take that with appropriate salt, reported in March that Washington had approximately 2 months of rare earth inventory for military manufacturing, partially corroborated by Reuters and the American Prospect. Johnson's conclusion that Iran is a proxy for China, that's his analytical read. The supporting evidence is real. The causal claim is stronger than what's fully proven. But here's the bottom line. China did not fire a single missile in this conflict. While we burned through our stockpile fighting Iran, China watched, tightened its rare earth export controls, and built its strategic petroleum reserves on discounted Iranian and Russian crude. Whether you call that proxy warfare, strategic patience, or the luckiest coincidence in modern history, the effect is identical. And this is where it connects to something much larger than Iran. RAND Corporation, not a dovish think tank, ran the numbers on a Taiwan conflict. 18 out of 24 wargame simulations, a US conflict with China over Taiwan before 2027 ends in American defeat or a Pyrrhic victory that looks like defeat. That was before we expended 50% of our THAAD inventory, before we burned half our Patriot stockpile, before China tightened its grip on its rare earth supply. CSIS's Kansian was direct. Even before the Iran war, stockpiles were deemed insufficient for a peer competitor fight. That shortfall is now even more acute. Here's the timeline. Missile replenishment, 1 to 4 years to pre-war levels. Taiwan threat window, potentially 2027 to 2028. The gap between those two timelines is not a policy debate. It's arithmetic.
I mean, they've got to sit back and recognize they don't have U.S. military bases in Taiwan, in like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates had U.S. bases. And U.S. promised we'd protect it, and the U.S. was unable to protect them. And so, if you're Taiwanese, you got to say, man, under what planet is the United States going to protect us? They're not.
Johnson's conclusion on Taiwan is debatable, and I think he's too pessimistic about American commitments in the Pacific. But the underlying math is not debatable, and nobody in Washington is asking this question loudly enough. Did we just trade our Pacific deterrence capability for 7 weeks in the Middle East? Okay, now this is the part of the interview where I have to be most careful, and I'm going to tell you upfront exactly what I will and won't say, and why. Johnson goes hard on Trump's mental state.
Irritable. He had no control over his temper, would yell at people. He would forget that he had said something. He was engaging in what's called confabulation, where he would say things like yesterday. He said, well, we got minesweepers right now clearing out the mines in the Strait of Hormuz. No, they don't. Because if the minesweepers were out there, they'd be attacked. So, but he's, oh yeah, that's what's going on. So this this whole mental decline, people think it's showing indications of frontal lobe, prefrontal lobe dementia. So, basically the front part of the brain starts to atrophy. And that front part of the brain is important in terms of, your social filters telling you what's appropriate to say, what's not appropriate to say, how to act, how to interact with other people. And he's also exhibiting some of the physical signs. When he stands, he's got a cast, he leans forward. So it's alarming that Trump, he's always been a narcissist. And part of that narcissism was he's terribly insecure. So you got to tell him he's smart, he's great, he's wonderful, just, but now it's compounded because there is a serious issue with his mental ability. And I'm going to keep talking about it. People need to keep talking about it. He should be compelled to resign the presidency. He should be, getting some medical assistance. But frankly, there's not. This is irreversible. All it is it's going to continue to accelerate and grow worse and worse.
Here's how I handle this. 3 layers. Layer 1, documented, verifiable public record. The Wall Street Journal reported, and the White House did not deny, that following the downing of U.S. aircraft over Iran, the president had an extended, intense reaction. Aides managed his access to the Situation Room during that period. Mersheimer cited the same report in his April 21st interview. It is on the public record. Layer 2, also documented. Trump stated publicly that minesweepers were actively clearing mines in the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. Navy's operational posture, confirmed publicly, is that they were not operating inside the mine threat area of the strait at that time. That discrepancy is documented. Layer 3, what I will not do. Larry Johnson is not a neurologist. I am not a neurologist. Diagnosing a sitting president with a frontal lobe dementia from a podcast is not analysis. It's speculation. And speculation, even well-intentioned, discredits the legitimate, verifiable observations underneath it. I won't endorse that framing, period. What I will say as a constitutionalist is the behaviors in the WSG. What I will say as a constitutionalist, if the behaviors in the WSJ report are accurate, if decision-making during a live military crisis was functionally managed by aides, that is a constitutional question. Article 25 exists. Congressional oversight exists. And trust us, everything's fine from the same Pentagon that called the blockade total control is not a sufficient answer. Here's another piece Johnson covers that deserves a careful look.
Well, Hegseth one is he's immature, he's impulsive, he is the ultimate sycophant in terms of seeing how far he can shove his nose up Trump's ass, but he's thin-skinned. So he's had personality conflicts with some of these people, and Phelan, I understand, is one. He's jealous. Hegseth is also insecure, and a lot of negative traits on the part of Hegseth, and just things you don't want in somebody who's heading up in this case, the so-called Department of War. Again, changing it from defense to offense is. It's sending a signal to the world that the United States is going to be the aggressor. The complete violation of everything the United States was supposed to be, at least in the vision of even John Adams. Hegseth he's house cleaning. He's trying to find people who are ideologically going to be supporting the Trump agenda, no matter how crazy or how dangerous. So that's what's underway.
I think finally he's going to get the hit because Donald Trump once said that Pete Hegseth was one of the first, figures in the administration who gets, let's go, let's do it. And he was, and it both, not Donald Trump, but New York Times as well, reported that Pete Hegseth was.
Yeah, well, when they reach the point that it's the complete failure of this war with Iran becomes apparent, and then the blame game begins in earnest, that's when Hegseth will get dumped. He'll get blamed.
I'll translate that from Johnson to English. Multiple senior administration officials reportedly expressed reservations before the February 28th strikes. The New York Times confirmed this. The White House has not formally denied the substance of the reporting. I'm not here to pile on any individual personality. But here's a straightforward question. If senior officials advocated for a military action, that action was taken, and the strategic results include a 50% depletion of our most critical air defense missiles in 7 weeks, then someone needs to appear before the Senate I'll translate that from Johnson to English. Multiple senior administration officials reportedly expressed reservations before the February 28th strikes. The New York Times confirmed this. The White House has not formally denied the substance of that reporting. I'm not here to pile on any individual personally, but here's a straightforward question. If senior officials advocated for a military action, that action was taken, and the strategic results include a 50% depletion of our most critical air defense missiles in 7 weeks, then someone needs to appear before the Senate Armed Services Committee and explain the threat assessment, the expected munitions cost, and how the replenishment timeline was factored into the planning. That is not partisan. That's what institutional accountability looks like. And it hasn't happened yet. Here is the moment in this interview where I genuinely had to pause and rewind, because Johnson describes something that is wild when you step back and think about what it actually means.
Yeah, no, look, the reality is Iran controls what comes in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. The United States doesn't. The United States has, they control from a standoff position, probably 300 miles off the coast of Iran, maybe farther. And as you move away from the Strait of Hormuz, as you're moving out into the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, the distance increases. So it's just, I try to liken it to, it's one thing if you're blocking a doorway. Let's have a friend and family program. If you're part of the friend and family program, you don't have to pay a toll to come in and use the Persian Gulf. You get to go for free. But if you're not on the friends and family program, you're going to pay. And so then that leads nations to say, hey, can I be your friend? They start looking at it very pragmatically, which is like why you've seen some interesting diplomatic moves by Japan and South Korea, because they need that oil out of the Persian Gulf bad. And the impact of the shortages is just, it's really started hitting this week. It's going to be worse next week and worse the week after that. Particularly watch the airline industry, what happens with it, because across the board they're cutting flights and raising fares dramatically.
Let me explain what this actually means at the geopolitical level. Japan, South Korea, two of America's closest Pacific Treaty allies, are currently going diplomatic math about whether they need to be friendlier with Iran. Not because they love the Iranian government, but because they cannot afford to not have access to Persian Gulf oil. And Iran has now set the price structure. Russia and China, sail free. Friends of America, figure it out. That's not just a logistics problem. That's a geopolitical pricing structure that is rewriting alliance relationships in real time. And Tehran built it in a few weeks of crisis. Genuinely impressive and genuinely alarming. And it's not just Japan and South Korea. Johnson on NATO. And this is the quote. I'll let it stand on its own.
Europe, Europe couldn't find its ass if you stapled their hands to their ass. Okay, they don't know what they're doing. They've split. This is let's call it the secondary fallout from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, because the United States had demanded that, hey, we want support from NATO, and NATO said, nah, not our issue. And now Trump's wanting to punish Spain, kick Spain out of NATO, supposedly, one of the recommendations of the Pentagon. Italy told them, hey, you're not using our air bases anymore to use your refuelers to go out and attack Iran. And, Italy's not on board. So now you're seeing the fissures, there was already problems of unity within NATO, despite claims, oh, we're unified than ever. Nonsense. Those divisions are growing. The fissures are widening. And so, again, this from the Russian standpoint, they're watching with great interest as NATO breaks up. That's where it's headed. And then Europe is faced with this choice of we're running out of oil. With Kazakhstan's announcement that as of May 1st, not sending any more oil to Europe. Germany, I believe, was a particular recipient of that. Well, that's another 20% gone. So Europe's got to go find an alternative source. And so, like the classic economic theory, when you have a shrinking pool, a shrinking amount of something that everybody wants, the price for it goes way up.
America First perspective, and I mean this sincerely, Italy refusing to let us use their airbase is, in one sense, exactly what I've argued for years. Europeans taking responsibility for their own security. Good. But here's the uncomfortable truth. We designed a foreign policy that required their bases, required their cooperation. And now they're saying, no, our Middle East strategy is compromised. That's not Europe's fault. That's 40 years of alliance architecture built on assumptions that no longer hold. This is the thread that runs through everything we've covered today. And it's why I want to pull it all together now. Let me show you what this looks like from 30,000 feet. Here's the picture. The blockade is real, but it's not total control. Iran is routing 90% of what it needs through shadow fleets, Pakistani ports, and Caspian Sea corridors built over 46 years of sanctions experience. We're intercepting the edges. The missile stockpile numbers are not classified, not contested, and not okay. We've expended approximately half our THAAD, half our Patriots, and 45% of our precision strike missiles in 7 weeks. CSIS says 1 to 4 years to rebuild. The Pacific window, maximum vulnerability versus China, opens right now. And China? China imposed rare earth export controls. China watched us burn through our stockpile. China built strategic petroleum reserves on discounted Iranian and Russian crude oil while we fund the war that's taking it off global markets. China didn't fire a missile, and it may have done more strategic damage to American military capacity than Iran has.
Because Iran is fighting as a proxy for China, and Iran is depleting the inventory, the weapons inventory of the United States, so that right now the United States is in no shape whatsoever that it could try to challenge China.
Whether you call that proxy warfare, strategic patience, or coincidence, the effect is the same. And this wasn't inevitable. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Whether you call that proxy warfare, strategic patience, or coincidence, the effect is the same. And it wasn't inevitable. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Kane reportedly warned the president before February 28th that a protracted campaign would drain missile stockpiles. Multiple senior officials expressed reservations. That's been reported. Those choices have consequences, and the consequences land not on the people who made the choices, but on the sailors executing them, the taxpayers funding them, and the strategic position of the United States for the next 5 years. I'll give the economic last word to Johnson, because this part hasn't gotten enough attention.
Gas, it's about fertilizers, helium, it's about internet. Iran can just put an end to the internet of these countries. It's just unbelievable.
Well, yeah, no. I had never sat down and thought about it and said, okay, if the Strait of Hormuz was closed, what would be the economic impact? It was only after it was closed they started saying, oh, what's the impact going to be? And then when you looked into it, you're going, holy mother of God, this is bad. This is impactful for everybody, even the United States. That while if you have to rank the countries that are going to survive the impact, Russia, China, the United States, but still within the United States, it's going to create some real economic challenges, some real problems.
Yeah.
The water is coming in. Whether Washington has sought high ground yet, I'll let you decide. Here's my take. Direct, no hedging. Larry Johnson got 3 things right. The blockade effectiveness is overstated. The missile math is alarming. And China is a major strategic beneficiary of this conflict, by design or by opportunity. Where I push back, the medical speculation goes beyond what the evidence supports. The documented behaviors are concerning enough on their own. The diagnostic overlay makes the argument easier to miss, not stronger. And Iran as pure China proxy is Johnson's analytical conclusion, not an established fact. As an America First, Constitution First analyst, my recommendation is negotiate a realistic agreement that ends this conflict and stops the munitions drain. Not because Iran deserves a reward, but because we cannot sustain this rate of depletion. And pretending otherwise is a lie that costs us Pacific deterrence, rebuild industrial sovereignty, domestic rare earth processing, multi-year defense contracts with real funding, and Congress doing its actual job on the $925 billion defense budget, and never let a foreign capital's political agenda substitute for a clear American national interest in the room where military decisions get made. Why am I still bullish on America? Because this country has fixed worse problems faster than most people expected. The American workers in Camden, Arkansas, assembling every PAC-3 interceptor made on this planet. The engineers in Huntsville building Seekers. The researchers at Realloys in Euclid, Ohio, building North America's first domestic rare earth processing facility specifically designed to end our dependence on Chinese supply chains. These people are already building the solution. They just need Washington to fund it, to sustain it, and get out of the way. When American ingenuity gets a clear mission and real resources, it has never in history let this country down. And it won't start now. I want to add one layer that Johnson touches on but doesn't fully develop, because I think it's the most important question nobody in Washington is answering publicly. We spend $925 billion a year on national defense. That's more than the next 10 countries combined. And in 7 weeks, we've expended half of our most critical air defense missiles, cannot rapidly replace them, and have a documented 1 to 4 year window of Pacific vulnerability. How is that possible? 3 answers, each one uncomfortable. Answer 1, industrial-based failure by design. Camden, Arkansas has one final assembly line of PAC-3 MSCs, the only one on Earth, one facility, one building. One Boeing Seeker plant in Huntsville produced 650 to 700 units in 2025 and must reach 750 before any further expansion takes effect. This bottleneck was built over decades of peacetime contracts that prioritized cost efficiency over strategic resilience. Answer 2, the China dependency trap. The Pentagon's own 2027 deadline prohibiting US weapons from using magnets made with Chinese origin rare earths tells you everything you need to know. As of 2026, we are still using Chinese origin rare earths in the weapons defending our ships in the Persian Gulf. That is not a hypothetical future vulnerability. That is the current operational reality. Answer 3, the optimism case, because this is fixable. The same American industrial machine that let these chains atrophy proved that during the rearm initiative that it can ramp up fast when given a real mandate. 14,000 to 100,000 artillery shells per month, 3 years. No wartime declaration. That happened. The failure isn't American workers or American engineers. The failure is in the leadership that didn't give them the right mission, the sustained funding, or the multi-year contracts to build stockpiles before the crisis arrived. That is fixable, but only if we're honest about it first. And with that honesty starts, we're asking, where did the $925 billion go? And demanding a real answer. Now I want to hear from you, and I need a real answer. CSIS confirmed this week that we've expended approximately half our most critical air defense missiles in 7 weeks, 1 to 4 years to get back to pre-war levels. China controls 98% of the rare earth processing our missiles depend on and has already begun restricting access. Given all of that, given those actual numbers, should the United States accept a diplomatic agreement that Iran acknowledges Iranian leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, even if it means Iran keeps some nuclear enrichment capability in order to stop the drain and start rebuilding? Yes or no? Tell me exactly why. Drop it below. I read every comment, and this is a debate that actually matters, not the cable news version of it. And if this is the kind of analysis where we show you the source, verify the number, and let you decide, and that's what you've been looking for, hit subscribe. Share this one if you know someone who only gets their news from cable and wonders why nothing makes sense anymore. All the sources are in the description. They can check every number for themselves. That's how we do it here. This is ARM Geopolitics. I'm Aaron. Stay sharp, stay informed, and never stop questioning. I'll see you in the next one.